For over a decade now, the age of the light novel anime ushered in by Haruhi Suzumiya has been upon us. But to call it a massive presence at this point would be to overstate things somewhat. Of over 60 currently airing TV anime, only 5 of them are actually one of these dreaded adaptations. In this same current lineup, there are 5 anime based on mobile games, and that doesn't even include some cases like a new season of Wake Up Girls, a franchise that had a mobile game launch a month before its anime premiere that failed after a year and was shut down, and an adaptation of a spin-off manga for the Idolmaster franchise. If you haven't noticed this trend yet, you probably soon will, because mobile game tie-ins and adaptations are on the rise, and quickly becoming one of the more prominent sources for anime. If you want to look at original anime airing right now that aren't children's series, there's about 6 of those, so these mobile game adaptations are already as common as that. This represents a source of some concern, but perhaps surprisingly, also an incredibly exciting opportunity for the anime industry. If you're skeptical of these developments, just wait and see some of the good they could bring. Starting with the big guns, Darling in the Franxx is great and all, but I think the upcoming Trigger production that will ultimately generate the most buzz and hype is Promare, a production which will mark the return of Hiroyuki Imaishi and Kazuki Nakashima, the director-writer pair behind both Gurren Lagann and Kill la Kill. However, it is also a production which features the collaboration of X-Flag. X-Flag is the developer of Monster Strike, the highest-grossing mobile game of 2016 worldwide, and that was with 90% of that revenue just coming from Japan. Monster Strike already has a running anime adaptation that you can go check out with a free trial at crunchyroll.com/whydon'tIhaveoneoftheselinks yet, guys? And presumably there's going to be some sort of accompanying app for Promare if they're on board. At the very least, they're going to be using their obscene amount of microtransaction gacha money to help fund the production of this original anime. And that is the promise these mobile game adapted, adjacent, or tie-in anime represent. A massive pool of available money to help inject into this struggling industry, along with pretty loose requirements to get yourself a piece of that cash in many cases, all things considered. As Pause and Select went over when he discussed Dagashi Kashi, even all the way back with Astro Boy, anime has been turning to outside monetization to help recoup its cost of production. And so an outside product to sell that can be this loose in its demands, certainly much looser than adapting a manga or light novel series, is a good deal. I can't imagine Imaishi and Nakashima would stand having too many restrictions placed upon their creative visions, mavericks that they are, and yeah, all X-Flag would really require out of them for it to benefit from this arrangement would be, make some sick shit, dude, and then they can throw it in a game and profit. Princess Principal is an anime that also launched with a mobile game accompanying it, a vaguely Candy Crush style affair that also features 25 original characters not seen in the anime in addition to its cast of 5, since large casts of cute girls to collect are often so integral to these kinds of games. As I noted in my video on the studio that made it, 3 Hertz, Princess Principal was sort of handed down from on high to them by a production committee, so it differs slightly from Promare's situation probably, but it represents that same opportunity. All they needed to sell their game was cool spy girls, so they got a studio that's really into producing original anime, and that has the talent and connections to do so well, through an Eiichiro Okoichi, who writes some cool original anime, even if the quality of said anime could be accused of being a bit up and down, and let them have at it within those boundaries. The director recently said that Bandai Visual is hinging a second season upon figure sales, though that comment sounds somewhat tongue-in-cheek, so it could be that, or more just the financial success of this multimedia endeavor generally that would allow for a season 2. Striking even closer to the root of the industry's many issues than simply providing the means to produce more original anime is Cygames, the mobile game developer that has recently founded its own anime studio, Cygames Pictures. Kenipa Effect has done a bunch of coverage of them, and I'll be drawing on much of that here. They'd already gotten adaptations done for games of theirs like Rage of Bahamut and Grand Blue Fantasy, and that former one especially was another one of those great opportunities for a talented crew to simply do their thing, but Cygames is moving beyond even that now. With this studio of their own, they've got the stated goal of eventually being able to avoid outsourcing their productions and instead to do everything in-house, and to take advantage of their many resources to set a positive example for animator pay. Many of the most prominent issues with the current anime production model are things companies like Cygames are in a position to circumvent. The industry devil right now is the production committee, the primary way most anime will be funded. It involves a bunch of companies coming together to split up the costs, and so the risks, of producing an anime series, and because they're ponying up the cash, collectively they get to make the decisions about the production. If Sony Music is on board, they can mandate themes or insert tracks from one of their artists, specific voice actresses can be requested, etc. Another thing the committee splits up is the revenue, which is a big issue when a lot of the time the actual anime studio will either be a tiny part of the committee or not even on it at all. Anime studios are put into a position where they get the money to keep everyone employed in order to produce that anime, but are making little or no actual revenue off of that production itself, and so they're essentially contract workers, unable to build up cash reserves of their own. If the studio is the company putting together and funding the production, then those issues become non-issues. Producer Nobuhiro Takenaka has said that he fully intends for Cygames Pictures to be financially self-sufficient off the back of its works alone, but the many revenue streams of Cygames as a whole are also cited as something that will allow for the infrastructure and talent to do so to get built up. Kyoto Animation, the standard all other studios aspire to, is special because, well, it's special for a lot of reasons, but specifically they are able to circumvent this production committee system most of the industry is chained to. They own and publish most of the IPs they adapt, and through that, combined with the general profitability of what they produce, they are able to sit atop any such committee and build up that actual revenue. A lot of studios across the industry are trying to get to that point, and making some progress. For instance, PA Works managed to avoid outsourcing any episodes of Eccentric Family's second season, but Cygames' method of achieving this goal seems like one of the most feasible. Oh, and how could I forget to mention Kemono Friends, the absolute smash success that became the most widespread cultural event in anime outside of Your Name for 2017.
I find your lack of faith disturbing.
It isn't that I had forgotten about it up to this point. Unfortunately, mention of Kemono Friends took this long because discussion of it belongs on the dark side of mobile game anime. While it is yet another example of a great team of creators getting an opportunity to express themselves with fairly loose restrictions when creating an adaptation, it shows that things won't necessarily change. Mobile game adaptations by and large still present a situation where an outside corporation controls the production, where the team creating the anime has little say in things, and where after a given production they can simply be cast aside. Now, thankfully Tatsuki and his team garnered enough love that they should have a strong fighting chance here at establishing themselves apart from Kadokawa, but that isn't often the case. Cygames is great and all, but unless we see more studios making similar moves, mobile games may very well simply become another standard source material like light novels, without disrupting the self-destructive status quo the industry currently operates by. And just like light novels, mobile game adaptations have a host of elements intrinsic to the medium that bring a number of issues with them. Of course, Schoolgirl Strikers, an anime I ragged on in the past, was a mobile game adaptation. It's indicative of so many of those elements this source material can cause. Namely, its cast is all close to lifeless in terms of characterization, and also lacks anything beyond the most basic and generic of character motivations to drive them forward. Princess Principal demonstrates that not all mobile game anime are bound to this fate, but in the case of anime where the associated game has already been out and people have gotten attached to these pre-established characters, the creative freedom with them will often be somewhat limited. An even stronger example of this is the series Battle Girl High School, which presents you with this endless procession of utterly lifeless character husks, each one leaving you more drained of your humanity than the last, as they desperately attempt to steal away some of it for themselves during their extremely limited screen time. The action scene that caps off the first episode is just sad, clearly demonstrating an obligation to give a brief highlight to each and every one of its girls, lest there be any gamer who poured 100,000 yen into pulling their favorite character from the gacha, only to not get to see her in anime form. The pre-existing casts that the core audience for the show is already going to be invested in creates another issue as well. UFO Table's adaptation of Token Rambu was a perfect example of a show that structured its narrative around a pre-existing knowledge of and investment in these characters going into it, and totally failed for me in lieu of that. Shirobako opens up with 4 minutes and 20 seconds of establishing character skill sets, personalities, and aspirations, and boom! Brilliant cut to a single frame that will instantly earn the investment of anyone watching. Is the best anime ever too harsh a comparison? Fine, let's go with a random decent seasonal. We'll choose Juni Taisen. Like Token Rambu, it's also an action series, so it's a solid comparison. Over the course of the first 2 minutes, we get the interesting bit of world building about an entire city somehow being emptied out for this event, and through Boar's dialogue, can conclude that she is incredibly cocky and also somewhat entitled, having no concerns about keeping everyone else waiting when she notes that they may have all arrived already. But a bit of tactical analysis of her situation informs us that she does have at least some idea of what she's doing. Now that our interest has been piqued by as to how this woman strutting around in a pair of heels so brazenly, large machine guns at her sides, came to be, we get into the character building flashback. This scene is the early action sequence to show off just how strong the series will be in that regard, but it's already given enough context to this fight to make it engaging for more than just the action itself. What we're witnessing is part of what will mold the serious, slightly nervous trainee we now see before us into the bizarre character we just saw. It isn't masterfully done. God knows Nishio gets a bit self-indulgent with the writing here, as he is wont to do, but it's functional. It fucking works. Token Rambu opens immediately on an action scene, with its pair of heroes naming each other as if that will give us context into who they are, because for some of the audience it will. And also immediately starts referencing the Time Retrograde Army, whatever that might be, before outright dismissing the question, what's the Time Retrograde Army going to do with that cargo? You know, in other words, what are the stakes to this chase scene and why should our audience be invested in it? Ah, brilliant. That's probably what they said in the writer's room when that question came up too. The action isn't even compelling in and of itself. Oh my god, unlimited budget works, all you want. But we get a shot of a dude slicing the air, and then cut to a shot of a cut appearing across a horse's neck. Weak. I'd like that unlimited budget put into people actually physically engaging and fighting each other in my fights, not into all the rain particles glancing off a sword that never touches another sword. But I'm sorry for the diversion, this video isn't the UFO table rant. This scene is 3 minutes and 40 seconds before we get to the title card, so roughly comparable to these other two shows, and the only characterization we get from it is that one dude is the brash senpai, and the other dude is the somewhat sheepish kohai. We don't get anything that makes them compelling as characters, we get the character archetypes they occupy. And yeah, if you already know those other elements of their characters that give them some depth, or if they lack that, are at least invested enough in this pretty illustration that's got a sticky note of character tropes plastered onto it that you won't mind, that's fine. But this is where such series start to break down for people unfamiliar with the source material, which is the ultimate failing of many of these mobile game adaptations. It's why, by and large, their scores range from poor to outright terrible. There's problems very common to things like manga adaptations that have to be accounted for, like the temptation to simply go with a by the manga panels adaptation, even when that won't necessarily flow well in animation, and the much discussed difference in sensation of time passing between the two mediums. The key difference about mobile game adaptations is that a manga adaptation that fails to account for these common issues is a poor viewing experience, flat out. Whereas a mobile game adaptation can fail to do so, and still function perfectly well for those viewers that are already fans, which might be all the anime aspires to. This might seem like a bit of a minor issue, so what, some anime that won't be for you is getting made. But in an industry that is, yes, producing too much anime, with industry members talking about talent spread too thinly whenever the subject arises, having these developers coming in and throwing down cash to get an extra 7 anime produced in a season that already had over 50 stretches things even closer to a breaking point. Somewhat subtly, these mobile game adaptations have become one of the more prevalent sources for TV anime, and the money they bring with them represents a massive potential positive for the industry that should not be undersold. But along with that comes the potential to be a drain on that industry, and perhaps both most worryingly and most likely, the potential to be just another participant in its current unsustainable status quo. Thankfully, this channel's current status quo is sustainable, thanks to my generous supporters on Patreon. but that doesn't mean that status quo can't improve. A goal I've been floating for a little while here has been the group anime watches some other people do on Patreon, specifically one for all of Pokemon, chronologically, mostly so I have an excuse to watch it. And so, right now, I am committing to starting up that master quest, open to all patron levels, immediately upon reaching my goal for working full-time on my own content. It's gotta wait till then because I gotta sleep at some point. A huge thank you to my best friends, Carkeys, Skylar Morrow, Nadeto64, Omer Kedem, Mackenzie Knowles, Keiko Cat, Christian Emery, Presto Puma, Laugherstyle, Omifomi, Marcus Gand, Sam Lossaraptor, Tyler aka Gigs, Shoko Asahara, Lord Liquid Bacon II, McDougal, Kieran Rice, Valkion, Tincho37, Taktoa, Cherry Boy Writer, Mathwiz97, Joji Matthews, Shofty, Zados Tenjin, Saiker, Zeria, Sakamoto Mio, Darian De Sotel, Joaquim Alfelt, and McCoolman in a world we must defend. God.